It's our differences which make teams stronger. It's my differences which makes me valuable. If you ask Sean Glaze to define leadership and effective team building, those would be the fundamental tenets on where he would start his description. Glaze is an expert in creating and maintaining more positive and productive team building cultures. He's an author and engaging speaker who encourages his audience to laugh together so that they have more success working together. As a successful high school basketball coach and teacher with over 20 years of experience, Glaze gained some valuable insights on building effective teams and what it takes to build successful cultures, and as a result, he founded Great Results Teambuilding to share the lessons he learned about building winning teams both on and off the court, to share his knowledge with athletic groups, executives, and corporate leaders. He joined me this week to have a discussion about the intersection of basketball, leadership, and building team unity. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Absolutely. So, Sean, if you're ready, I'll welcome you to the program. And I'm excited to have a chat with you today about company culture. Great to be with you this afternoon. And thanks so much for being here, buddy.
Thrilled to take the time and to share some information with you and your audience. Looking forward to a good conversation.
Absolutely. So, Sean, tell me, I know you work with companies and executives to help them build company culture and become better leaders. So I'm wondering if you could just give me a 360-degree view on how you help the world and how you hope to make a difference from what you do.
Absolutely, Kevin. Well, I am a speaker and author and coach who helps leaders to improve team performance with a more positive and profitable team culture. And that sounds all nice and wrapped up in a bow, but basically it was as a high school basketball coach that I learned what not to do in terms of leadership, because I had focused completely on X's and O's and strategy and individual skills, completely neglecting the culture and the connections that would allow that strategy to actually succeed. And so after learning a great deal over the years following that failure and focusing on improving myself as a leader so that I could build more positive cultures in terms of basketball, I was then able to begin going out and sharing with some other athletic groups and then with some educational staffs and then ultimately with some nonprofits and corporations in order to help their leaders take those same ideas, because principles go across industries and teams are teams are teams. So the same issues we had with trust or feedback or accountability are things that now I get to help leaders with around the country and now up into Canada with you and your audience.
Absolutely. And I know that you have three sort of aspects that you think build trust. So I'm wondering if you could share the three keys to building trust in your view.
Oh, that is so important. And one of the things that you want to do, whether it's as a leader who has a title and authority, or even as a coworker who is working as a teammate to accomplish a goal and to make sure that you're enjoying those days together, you're going to need trust. And trust is basically the thing that allows everything else to be done, not just on your team, but with your clients as well. And so when I share, whether it's virtually or in person, different workshops with organizations to build and establish and strengthen trust, we talk about the fact that you need to build relationships that are strong enough to support the weight of truth. And I think you do that with three things. And this is obviously a pretty short explanation, but the first thing you need to do is you need to be competent. You need to be able to do what it is that you were hired to do what it is that people are expecting you to do, so that you actually don't let down the team with something that you provide that's not up to that level of expectation. So the first thing that is kind of that first leg on the stool of trust is, are you competent? The second is where a lot of teams end up stumbling. And this is what I think as listeners and as leaders, most of the time we drop the ball on, is we don't take care of that second leg. And that is, in order to build and strengthen trust, you don't just need to be competent in your role, but you need to show concern for others. Do you actually take the time, and are you intentional about demonstrating, not just thinking and knowing internally, but demonstrating to others through what you say and what you do, that you're thinking of them, that you're aware of their situation, that you empathize with their needs, and that you sometimes even take the initiative to do things without having to be asked. I think concern for others is the second leg. And then the final one is, do you keep those commitments that you've made? Do you follow through when you say you're going to have something done? Do you have that done on or before that deadline? Is that something where you keep those promises in terms of not just being on time, but having those things that are deliverables to your clients and to your coworkers? And I think those are the three things that are basically the three different categories that people look at when they're judging you about extending trust, whether it's personally or professionally.
Yeah, the first tenet of building a relationship of any kind is building a foundation of trust, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's so important, not just for professionally, but personally. When I talk to people who are on teams and people who are in teams, obviously people bring their relationships and their situations at home with them to work, and now in virtual circumstances, that idea of understanding those three things that build trust can go a long way, not just having a better life away from work, but absolutely having a better work life when you're there.
And Sean, I'm curious to ask you about rising above COVID as a leader. And what I mean by that is, how do you think we can persevere uh, from a leadership standpoint as things get back to normal and get people excited about coming back to work? What role do you think leaders have to play in the regard of getting people excited to work again?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think the reality is there are so many people on so many teams that it's not about getting back to work. It's just a continual issue of adjusting ourselves to what is that new present normal. Because the reality is, whether it's COVID or whether it's the economy or whether it's some unknown change that's around the next corner, change is that one constant that we're always dealing with as leaders and as teammates. And I think that there are 5 things that, if you're wanting to build a world-class team culture, if you're wanting to actually have an effective, more positive and profitable team cultures, there's 5 areas that leaders need to focus on. And the first is the most important, and that is, have you clarified why you're there? What is that compelling common goal that we're all seeking to accomplish? Because the reality is, trust and teamwork are not determined by proximity or geography. I can actually work with somebody, whether it's in Canada or California or Atlanta or in China, based upon Zoom and other online platforms, and I can deliver things and be a contributing member of a very high performing team without actually having to be in person. I think the issue is, have we connected people to 2 things? The first is that compelling common goal, and the second is to each other. And those are the 2 most important parts of those 5 things that build culture. The first is goals, The second is relationships. And we can get into that a little bit more deeply, but the other three, which are part of what build teamwork and create culture for leaders so that their strategy can succeed, or after you've identified that goal and you actually have people bought in and connected to a compelling common purpose, the next thing is, have you taken the time to intentionally help them to build relationships and establish connections and an appreciation and an empathy that allows them to work together more effectively based upon personalities and strengths and challenges, etc. And then after you've gotten those two pieces of the puzzle, then it's all about, can you clarify expectations and establish those team standards that you're going to live by? And people oftentimes focus upon values, but values, unless you actually define those as what does that look like in our organization, what are the behaviors that we're actually going to define those values by, then values end up being sometimes an empty activity. After expectations, then it's all about accountability. And as I said, most all accountability is internal accountability. You can provide consequences, but I think that accountability is almost always a result of the empathy we've created, because I don't want to let people down if I care about that goal, if I care about the people that I'm working with. And then finally, are you taking the time to thank people? And I really think, Kevin, that to the question that you were asking, that's the one thing that I think leaders most need to do, is whether their people are in person or virtual, have you taken time to let people feel seen for the extra efforts that they've made and get into the progress that they've continued to make regardless of the difficult circumstances we've been faced with?
Yeah, absolutely. And Sean, I don't know if you knew this about me, but I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. So, in addition to hosting this podcast, I also work with employers here in Canada to educate them about the positive benefits of hiring folks with disabilities. So, as a leader, I'm curious to ask you your perspective on how do you view diversity, equity, and inclusion for individuals with disabilities and the importance of infusing them into the workforce?
Oh, well, this is something that, and whether it is in a basketball program or whether it's in a business setting, I think that diversity and inclusion and that idea of how diverse is your team, and are you as a leader and as a teammate appreciating the differences that people bring. And one of the things that I share, whether it's in a half day or a full day team building event that I'm facilitating, or if it's at a conference as a speaker, or even if I'm working with a leader one-on-one as a coach, one of the things that I think is so very important to emphasize to organizations is the fact that it is unbelievably vital to build those connections, to establish those relationships, because it is what we have in common. It is our similarities that we actually are going to bond over. And our similarities end up being something that inoculate us from things that might be divisive differences. Because on weak teams, I don't think that you have disagreement. On weak teams, I don't think you have a whole lot of people who are willing to risk ideas or to be different or to be anything other than vanilla, whatever that might be. They're going to go along and stay inside the guardrails of what is accepted and how we've done things, because they don't feel that safety, that psychological safety, in order to share or to be truly who they are, or to give that idea that they've had that might improve things, but it goes against maybe how we've done things previously. And I think that whether that is in terms of gender or race or background or culture or religion or any number of different things that make us different, our differences are what make teams stronger. And the more that teams come together and recognize as leaders and teammates that it's what makes me different that makes me valuable, then teams end up benefiting from those difficult conversations that I think sometimes in unproductive teams and in unhealthy team environments, you don't have those conversations to draw out the strengths that a lot of people bring, but aren't always as willing to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know to that end, you have some thoughts on how people can become unstuck and coachable. So I'm wondering if you can share those with me this afternoon.
Oh, well, thank you for teeing that up, man. Yeah, Kevin, I just recently published my fourth book, which is Staying Coachable. And so I
Congratulations.
thank you. It was a fantastic launch, and I've gotten a great deal of positive feedback. But more importantly, I think that it's a really powerful tool for teams and leaders, for individuals, regardless of industry, to be able to get better and grow beyond that limiting ceiling that we sometimes put on ourselves that keeps us from growing. And you've probably heard the phrase, uncoachable kids become unmanageable adults. Well, as a basketball coach, you can imagine I had some athletes that weren't always as open to feedback and weren't always as excited about needing to change the way that they, release their shot or free throw or how they went about things. And so as a coach, early on, I really was ineffective. And I realized that a whole lot of their lack of improvement was my responsibility because I wasn't going at it the right way. And what happened, Kevin, is I realized after you look in the mirror and you're kind of honest with yourself, uncomfortably so, I realized that I was going at those attempts to improve people the wrong way. And I think that there are a number of leaders that can identify with this. And that's when I push somebody because I was a command and control young coach. When I pushed somebody and said, you need to do, you're going to have to, we need you to, et cetera. They weren't always open because once somebody pushes you, the initial response is maybe I'm going to push back. I'm going to be kind of stubborn if I don't see the benefit to. And instead of commanding and controlling people from whatever position, I think that you find far more success, and this is something that I wish I was sooner to have discovered. But you certainly find far more effective success in helping people to grow if you are building connections and staying curious. And it's that curiosity that provided the questions that I actually built the book Staying Coachable with. And Staying Coachable is the title for the book, but it's all about basically that process that people have to go through in order to be willing to change and then excited to change because they see the benefits that are going to be available to them after they make that decision and take those steps.
Yeah, and as a basketball coach at Hardshaw, I'm also curious to ask you about how your own personal lived experience on a basketball court sort of uh, influences the work that you do today.
Oh, well, as a basketball, and there's so many people in the events that I'll go to that don't have a background in athletics, and I certainly understand that. But one of the things that I found is that the same issues that crept into our locker room and were challenges for us as a team and as a program are the ones that leaders and teams deal with across the country and around the world, regardless of industry. And so issues with feedback and accountability and trust and collaboration and clarifying team standards and all of those things are things that as a basketball coach, we had to define and to clarify and to work through and to get buy-in and commitment for. And the first person that needed to stay coachable in my program was me, because I got to a point where I had gotten comfortable. And here's a funny thing, Kevin, when I'm speaking about staying coachable at conferences, I'll ask two questions early on because staying coachable, being coachable is really about two things. Everybody wants to say, yes, I'm coachable. Well, there's two parts to what it means to be coachable. Here's my definition. Being coachable means you want to be better and you're willing to change. Now that sounds pretty simple, but when I'll speak in front of a large group, I'll say, okay, raise your hand if you want to be better. And of course, the entire conference audience raises their hands. Everybody wants to be better. And then you ask the second part of that. Well, raise your hand if you are really excited about change. And there's far fewer hands that go up in that circumstance. And so I think that everybody sincerely wants to be better, but it's that issue of change and how we sometimes have taught ourselves to perceive change that ends up being a bit of an obstacle. And so the questions that I share in the book, and it's a story that kind of carries a couple of characters who were frustrated with their situations, a father with his corporate situation and a son with his basketball playing situation. But they're both frustrated because they're in a situation where they both need to change and they're both being pushed to change, but they're frustrated and annoyed with those attempts for them to be better for their team. And they actually encounter an older woman who ends up being a wise guide for them as they're hiking. And it really is a story of them learning through her that process of asking four very powerful sets of questions that lead them through that process of identifying what it is that they want and identifying where they are and identifying what they need to appreciate and become humble for. And then ultimately, what do they need to do differently?
Yeah, and Sean, I'm curious to ask you, based on your experience coaching people and just your own lived experience, we live in such a polarized world these days, whether it's societally, from a political standpoint, or just in general. I'm curious to get your thoughts on how we sort of bridge the divide of, uh, I guess, dysfunction and uh, find a way to find a better sense of camaraderie, because I think as leaders we can disagree with people respectively without trying to sort of become so territorial. So I'm curious to ask you, as a leader and people, how do you think we can develop a better sense of unity?
No, but that's the role of the leader. And whether it's the leader of a team on a basketball court or a volleyball court or a football field, or that's a leader of people in terms of a business or an organization, whether that's a leader of a state or of a nation, I think ultimately a job of leadership is absolutely that. You need to do two things. First and foremost, you need to clarify a compelling common goal. Why are we here? What is our purpose? And you need to give people time and opportunity to interact and to build connections that are meaningful. And that's the first two jobs of leadership if you want to build an effective and an exceptional team culture. After you do those things, then you can set expectations and define standards, and then you can hold people accountable, and then you can have those conversations about recognition and thanks. But I think that unity is achieved when you identify and emphasize, here are the things we have in common. It is our similarities that inoculate us against our differences. And the beautiful thing about America is we are an incredibly diverse society, but we absolutely share something. And I think that it's us having neglected the idea of what we share that has led to so much of the divisiveness. And it's easy sometimes, whether it's on a national level or whether it's in a personal level with you in your office and the person across the way that you don't agree with, we have this tendency to sometimes want to diminish people and just to put them in a box because we focus upon those differences. And if we can spend the time, and if we're intentional about leaders and teammates, about finding intentionally what are those things that are really important that we actually agree upon. And maybe that has something to do with being parents. Maybe it has something to do with some of our hobbies. Maybe it has to do with some of the principles and values that we share. But ultimately, whether that is Protestant or Catholic or atheist, whether that is Democrat or Republican, regardless of what issue might separate us, if you take the time to have a sincere and curious conversation, you're going to find meaningful things that you share in common with people. And those are the things that are going to, again, inoculate you from putting people into those tiny boxes where you want to diminish them to far less than they are.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I also want to dive into what makes you the person you are away from the office. I'm wondering, for you, Sean, what are your non-negotiables to happiness for you personally?
Wow, that is that's a $1 million question, right? What are the non-negotiables to happiness? Um, I think that it's really difficult sometimes, Kevin, to separate who we are. And I think that's something you're seeing, whether it's the great resignation as it's kind of been labeled, or I think that people, because of the pandemic, have looked in the mirror and recognized that they don't want to be a different person at work than at home. I think that people want to be recognized for who and what they are and their strengths and their desires. and what they want to define as success has maybe shifted somewhat. And so I think what you're seeing is people don't want to have that dichotomy of here's office me and here's personal me. I think they want to just be themselves and be recognized for that and contribute according to their strengths and what they think is important in terms of their purpose. And that really is kind of where I think I find my happiness. Is my purpose is to help people be better. And so hopefully I can develop myself so I can better help to develop and inspire others. And, I used to say, both as a coach and a parent, my job is to become irrelevant. If I'm doing a really good job as a coach, then my kids are going to coach themselves and they're going to be able to play a game without me having to say a word. If I'm doing a great job as a parent, then my kids are going to grow up and be independent. Our job is not to raise kids. Our job is to raise adults who are independent and don't need us. Now, hopefully they want to come back and enjoy the, camaraderie and the wisdom and the laughter and whatever else that you're going to share. But I think that happiness is something that for me is really about what can I do to help to develop others and equip them with an understanding and with maybe some tools that are going to help them be better for the people that they lead. Because ultimately that's what I needed when I was younger. And if we can actually give the best version of our wiser selves to people who are walking the same path we once did, then we got a chance to be pretty special.
And Sean, I know that American Thanksgiving is coming up, so I'm curious to know what are some of your Thanksgiving favorites at the dinner table, and some of your favorite holiday traditions.
Well, if my wife were sitting here, she would absolutely be cracking up right now because I enjoy Thanksgiving, and certainly I'm thankful for. I'm married into a beautiful, huge family, so we'll be getting in the car and heading from here in Atlanta, where we live, down to Savannah for a big family get together. I'm obviously thankful for family and for those relationships and the influence that so many positive people have had on me. But in terms of what I really look forward to at Thanksgiving, I am unbelievably thankful for pumpkin pie.
Sometimes it's the simple things in life, isn't it?
Give me
Yeah.
pumpkin pie and some Cool Whip, and I'm good, buddy.
Well, apple pie does it for me. So everything in moderation, right, Sean?
Not always as in moderation as we should, but that's okay.
Absolutely. And I'm also curious to ask you if you've given any thought to your personal or professional legacy and how you might want that to be defined.
Um, I think as you get older, it's only natural to start thinking not just about your success, but that shifts to your significance. And I think that obviously kind of goes into the legacy that you mentioned. Um, I won't be able to determine my legacy. Others will certainly do that. But I think that you have a chance to leave a legacy if you really do focus upon pouring into others and serving and inspiring others instead of just focusing on yourself. And so hopefully, as I continue to grow a little bit older and a little bit wiser, maybe I can pour into other people's cups and be of service in that way so that maybe they feel obliged to do the same down the line for others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you live down there in Georgia. So when you're not working, what do you like to do down there in the Atlanta area there, buddy? I'm just curious.
Yeah, do a great deal of hiking. Got some beautiful mountains and hiking trails around here. We've actually traveled around the country to some national parks and done a good bit of hiking. But we're very fortunate to have just gotten a little cottage on the water here at a little small lake north of Atlanta. So we spent some time there with family, and then I stay pretty busy walking the puppy dog.
Well, it keeps you young and active, doesn't it?
It does absolutely do that. Yes, sir.
Absolutely. And Sean, I'm curious to ask you your perspective on raising children. For 5 to 10 years ago, raising kids wasn't the definition that it is today. So I'm wondering the your definition, or how you view raising kids now than might have been 5 to 10 years ago.
Well, and having been a teacher and a coach, I had the privilege and benefit, Kevin, of working with hundreds and hundreds of young people at the high school age who were other people's children. And so to be a mentor or a teacher and somebody that had the opportunity to influence hundreds and hundreds of young men and women over, a couple of decades was an unbelievably special part of my life, and obviously part of what shaped me to be the person I am today, now leading, and sharing with leaders, much like I did with those students I had in my classroom. But I think in terms of parenting, I would say the same thing about parenting that I would about teaching. I don't think that parenting and teaching have changed so much. And I really don't think that kids have changed so much. But I think that all of the surrounding distractions have absolutely made things more challenging for us as teachers and parents. The same thing that's going to make somebody a successful person in terms of establishing an awareness of others and inspiring empathy for others and a desire to be ambitious and to make valuable contributions to society. Those are things that, whether it's as a parent or as a coach, you want to equip your kids and you want to equip those students with the tools to do those things and an awareness and understanding of the past in order to be able to move forward and be better in the future. But I don't think that parenting has changed. I think that the distractions and the temptations have certainly become far louder in the background. And so our job is to be that much more intentional about establishing a purpose and creating connections that are going to be positive connections for people. The only time that students or my kids ever got in trouble or in bad situations is when they were probably hanging out with the wrong people and trying to impress the wrong group. And so I think that goes back to the same thing that as leaders we want to create. If you can create connections among good people, then they're going to naturally inspire and kind of unite and keep each other focused on good stuff.
Yeah, and as a basketball coach, I'm curious to also ask you, the Supreme Court recently approved the name, image, and likeness rule for
Mhm.
college athletes. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on how it may impact the game of basketball moving forward.
Oh, wow. Well, again, I think that there are some things that are consistent and, I think that's a really interesting conversation because we get so caught up in what's going to be different that sometimes we lose sight of what's really important and valuable that is a consistent thing that we can hold on to and feel some sense of normalcy and impact and significance in holding on to. And I think with basketball, the court's going to stay the same size. The ball's going to be the same size. You're going to have very, very similar rules. You're still going to have groups that need to work together. But I think, again, that distraction of individualism is something you continue to see kind of wedge its way into programs and teams in different parts of our country, not just in athletics, but otherwise. And so the name, image, and likeness, I think, is absolutely a huge positive for kids, as long as it doesn't detract from what we're hopefully using athletics to teach, which is the importance of unity and being a small, significant part of something larger than myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Sean, tell me if people want to get connected with you or get an opportunity to buy your book, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, well, whether it is grabbing a copy of Staying Coachable, which I would love for them to walk away with in the next few days, it's available on Amazon. You can just Google Staying Coachable. You should be able to find it. They can also find me on my website, Kevin, at greatresultsteambuilding.com. And I would love to share, know that you probably have an opportunity to share some links and stuff in your show notes. Be able to give them a link to toolboxstuff.com. They can actually log in and get access to over 50 handouts and downloadable activities that they can use with their team to create a more effective culture. And if I can work with a leader of an organization to help them to actually build a more positive and profitable team culture, that ultimately is something that that does make me happy, and I'd be thrilled to be able to have that opportunity.
Absolutely, Sean. You know, as an old sports reporter and myself, I can always talk to you about basketball and leadership. So I really want to thank you for the work that you do to inspire the young people of tomorrow and the leaders of today, and for joining me this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Really enjoyed the conversation, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me. And I look forward to hopefully your audience reaching out. If I can be a resource, I'd be thrilled to do so.